one of the side effects, an unfortunate side effect of having a natural language interface like an LLM, is that we as humans associate language with a higher intelligence, with our intelligence, because we're the only beings that we're aware of that use language in the way we do. So we kind of think that they're intrinsically tied. So it's kind of hacked the human condition a bit by making us believe that something is intelligent because it's good with language. And therefore you end up with people, as you say, start to outsource thinking to it. And I think I'd say one other thing is that they also will eventually outsource intent to it. So
yes,
and that's where the real worries come in for me, because it's almost to outsource their thinking on writing a blog about something inane and then they put it up on the internet. It's going to fill the internet with a bit more slop, but hasn't done too much harm. But over time, if people become more and more hooked on these models or more and more used to using them, incorporate them into their life more in the way that, for example, Mustafa Suleyman from Microsoft would like us to believe we should, then eventually you actually start to outsource your intent. And I think once you do that, you're putting your intent as a human in the hands of some companies which don't necessarily have the greatest track record of human rights and so on. Whatever claims are being made by Elon Musk, Sam Altman, anyone who's a sort of pushing AI from the top level, it needs to be tempered with the understanding that they're trying to sell a product and they're in an arms race at the moment. What I would really like to see here is more sort of academic voices which don't have skin in the game. They understand the systems as well as the tech, well, much more probably than the tech CEOs, but as much as the engineers who are working in those companies. But they are free to say whatever they like. And actually, if you do listen to what the academics are saying, and I'm connected with quite a few of them on LinkedIn, they're far, far more reserved about what they say generative AI can and can't achieve. And they're far more forthright with saying there are massive risks and it needs to be regulated. And I mean, I don't see why they would say that if it wasn't true, because that's they have no reason to say it otherwise.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the CEO Retort. I'm your host, Tim El-Sheikh, and in this conversation, I am meeting Dr. Ben Mailing, who is an intellectual property attorney and a PhD mathematician from Imperial College London. And before that, he is a physics graduate from the University of Oxford, which for me, as far as I'm concerned, this is such a unique combination of expertise: intellectual property, advanced maths, copyright, generative AI, all that stupid debate about, who should own the copyright, or whether generative AI companies should have the right to completely eliminate your copyrights, yada, yada, yada. Well, in this episode, we're going to be debunking all of this bullshit. Now, as you know, I've been absolutely ranting about this for years because it's complete utter nonsense. As an AI entrepreneur for the past 20 years, I'm telling you, copyright was never an issue. If you needed any kind of proprietary data or copyright data, you try to go to the owner of that copyright and you negotiate a deal and see, hey, look, we want to train our AI model using that data. Let's have an agreement. Boom, right? But of course, that's not what the VC class want. They want everything to be for free, which is the reason why I've been warning for such a long time that we are going through a period of a pretty aggressive data grab. Now, speaking of which, this episode was actually recorded about 2 days before the Trump inauguration. So everything that we see today, this part of the episode is recorded about 4 weeks after the inauguration. So I've already been through all of the craziness that we've been through and everything that we've been witnessing so far with Doge especially. Now, we did not know that was about to happen, but we did actually warn, and I've been warning for quite a long time, that a lot of these organizations, these big corps and the AI startups are basically after your data. And what we see with Doge today, in the way they aggressively trying to dismantle government departments and basically take the data that none of these companies should have access to. That's the key point. And this is something that needs to stop. And it's dangerous because if you think that all of the issues that we've been talking about in relation to your privacy rights, which is your human rights, in relation to your copyright, which is your right of ownership. I keep on getting all these weirdos on LinkedIn. Yeah, I am calling you out. who go on about, oh, I have no issues with copyright. All these regulations are bad. These copyrights protect your right of owning your stuff. So everything that you build, or if you write a book, or any intellectual property that you own, well, guess what? These companies, they want you to have less of it. Now, of course, they would deny that. They'll be like, oh, no, we want you to own everything. The reality is they want everything in order to train that bullshit AI model. I say bullshit because, of course, we had DeepSeek, and I talked on the video about this here if you're interested. And it's basically proven them all completely wrong. That all that money that's been spent and everything that people like myself have been saying, that that the quality of AI is not about the size of the data, it's the quality of the data. But anyway, ranting away. I'm not going to go on about this. We're going to be discussing this in detail. If you absolutely want to now understand the reality of intellectual property, the laws behind it, and indeed generative AI, whether or not we really, really need all that copyright situation to even exist, well, this conversation is absolutely for you. And make sure you share with all the creatives, everybody who's concerned about copyright, because with my company and me personally, I get DMs every single day. People asking me, Tim, what do we do with this whole copyright thing? I don't want people to steal my voice. Yeah, I had singers basically emailing me say, I don't want people to steal my voice. I had artists emailing me say, I don't want these people to steal my art, etc., etc., etc. So this conversation should be actually quite helpful for you in this situation. Now, of course, I would also advise that you perhaps hire somebody like Ben or any other intellectual property lawyer to help you with these issues. And this conversation really is all about opening up your eyes about the reality and really, as always, getting rid of all that bullshit that is being peddled at you by these tech oligarchs once and for all. And before we carry on, I've got a massive favor to ask you. Please make sure you subscribe on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it makes a humongous difference with the algorithms. Same thing with Spotify. Make sure you follow us, give us 5 stars there, as well as Apple Podcasts. And now, more recently, we're also available on Substack. All the links are available in the description below. But also, make sure you support us by checking out our partners who are supporting this podcast, including Ground News and Saley. And now, my friends, without further ado, Dr. Ben Mailing. I do, and one of the reasons why I connected with you specifically for quite a while, because you are a mathematician, PhD mathematician from Oxford University that turned into a lawyer, which is something I don't think I've ever seen before. I've seen the opposite, maybe, but for a mathematician to become an IP lawyer, that's definitely new. So, how did that happen?
Yeah, so it's right. My background's in applied maths, and then when I kind of got a bit disillusioned with the world and the life of an academic, I decided I wanted to do something a bit more commercial, and I found out about the job of being a patent attorney, which is a type of lawyer, but we're kind of very close to the tech. So we're trying to help companies protect their inventions, whether that's by patenting them or applying trade secrets and this kind of stuff. But in order to do that, it requires quite a deep understanding of what the tech actually is. And if you're going to move into an area of tech like AI and software, then you kind of need to know the maths behind it. Yeah. So it kind of was quite a natural fit for me, actually. So that's how I ended up here.
That's interesting because there are quite a lot of IP lawyers out there, but they don't all have maths backgrounds. Like usually, well, from my experience, they tend to kind of hire an external expert who basically does the assessments to make sure that everything is in order, blah, blah, blah. So they do the techie stuff, but then the lawyers do the lawyery stuff. And there's always that risk that something might be missed in the middle. So I think the fact that you've got both, that's quite unique, isn't it? Because I haven't seen this before, like I said.
Well, I mean, so there aren't too many of us that are mathematicians. That patent attorneys, a lot of them do have they have some sort of scientific or technical background. But then you've also got the other layer of sort of litigation solicitors and things, and people who get involved in lawsuits, and they often have a legal background, and they often need support more on the tech side, and that's kind of another place where we come in, providing the technical sort of expertise to litigation solicitors, alongside, as you say, expert witnesses and things like that.
Yeah. So probably going to ask you a sensitive question. So what made you feel disillusioned with academia?
No,
I think I can relate.
no, there's nothing sensitive about that. I mean, there's the sort of ideal of being an academic would be absolutely brilliant. I would absolutely love to be a sort of Oxford professor sitting in my big leather chair, kind of writing interesting papers about maths. But in reality, the jobs are very, once you're a postdoc, the jobs that you're offered are, first of all, usually pretty short-term contracts, and they could be anywhere. If you really want to do the best research in your field, you probably won't be able to stay in London, say, or even the UK, if that's what you want to do. You probably just have to kind of follow. So there's a bit of a nomadic lifestyle, and that's really not what I want. I mean, I sort of was pretty certain I wanted to live in London after, well, I have done for my whole adult life, really, and I don't really want to go anywhere else. So that was part of it, I think.
Yeah. No, for me, it's different because I did start my PhD. A lot of people don't know that I actually started a PhD. The only thing is that I quit it after like half an hour, literally. Like I signed the papers and everything. It's like, for me, the thing about academia in general, and this is not an attack on academics. Actually, we work with academics and everything, but they have a very similar problem that actually we have in the tech sector. It's very inward looking. It's like people are inside their little bubbles and they just refuse to come out of that bubble. It's like their entire world view is whatever they see inside that bubble. And that just frustrates the life out of me because I always tell, I'm like, no, the world is a very different place from what you think it is. And the other thing that they tend to have, I don't know, I'm generalizing. Yeah, I'm not saying that everybody's like that, even in the world of tech. But generally speaking, it's like they think that because they're so clever in whatever it is that they do, therefore they're clever at everything. And I'm like, oh, no, that's a bad idea, like bad attitude.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, you're in good company of sort of, dropping out of academia and going into tech. A lot of the most successful tech people have done that. But I mean, I think that's right. Another issue I had with academia is that you get funneled to a very, very narrow place. I mean, I would have been the world expert in my narrow part of mathematics. But that is, and if I pursued it, there's some leeway to kind of move on to different problems, but you're kind of still, it's fairly narrow. And one of the things I quite like about my job now is that I work with a really wide variety of companies. It's all kind of AI related. That's my sort of thing, but it's across all these different fields, different types of technologies, different applications, different sizes of companies. We work with multinationals, some of the biggest companies in the world. We also work with little brand new startups. So it is quite a broad overview of things, which I think gives me quite a good, I think it gives me quite a broad view on what's happening in the technology as well.
Yeah. Well, this is how you and I connected. We've been connected for a while. It's like we always sort of comment on each other's posts, but I think the thing that I like I think it's always like if I'm commenting, well, I wouldn't say trolling necessarily, but if I'm trying to correct other people, I'm pretty certain that I'll see you there as well. So, like,
yeah, we do seem to be quite aligned.
Yeah, we kind of burst the bubbles a little bit, and we tend to annoy people. But I think this actually brings us very nicely to where we are today in the world of AI and tech, because it's quite relevant, like I said, to everything that you do. But of course, the key question, which is something that I talked about, as you know, with Raoul Lum, also another tech lawyer, although his background is opposite to yours. He started as a lawyer, then got into tech. But it's really this whole debate about intellectual property, copyright, who owns the content. And it's become such a divisive, which I didn't think it would become a divisive issue, but it is a divisive issue. People become so, I don't know why, but they get so aggravated when I say to them, actually, no, you are stealing other people's content. Oh, no, we don't. Oh, yes, you are stealing other people's content. And I think there are lots of different reasons, but we've even seen that with politics right now, that this aggressive push towards deregulation, and to our shock, and again, that's not being political, but even the Labour government in the UK, a government that normally associated with extra regulations, etc., they're trying now, apparently, it seems, that they want to weaken our copyright laws in the UK, even though we've never had issues with copyright laws in the UK. We've always been the world leader in the creative industry. We never had problems there. But now, even the Labour Party now, or the Labour government, is capitulating to the tech bros. This is really bad, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the government has, they want to push the UK as this sort of center of excellence and leadership in AI. And they are being told by the American tech companies who have been lobbying them in the background very, very aggressively that, the most important thing we have to do is to weaken our copyright laws. And they sort of see the dollar signs or pound signs maybe, and kind of think, well, we don't really have any choice. This is what we need to do in order to support the AI industry in the UK. On the other hand, we've got a very, rich creative industry in the UK, have done for a long time, which is worth a huge amount of our economy.
Yeah.
So those things have to be balanced against each other. So I see the kind of balancing out there. But what I don't like so much is that it's being kind of framed in what I think is a slightly disingenuous way. They say, well, if you look at the language of this consultation that's going on at the moment, or if you look at what has been said in the AI Opportunities Action Plan, there's a framing that copyright law is unclear as applies to AI in the UK. And whilst AI is a different use of copyright works to other things before, I mean, I should specifically say generative AI is different to other uses of copyright works. The UK, the law in the UK is not very uncertain. We basically have any use of copyright works, including any form of copying of them, or making derivative works and so on, is an infringement of copyright in that work. And we have quite a narrow set of exclusions to that. And it's quite difficult to fit AI training into any of those exclusions, generative AI training. So it seems fairly clear that, to me at least, that training a generative AI model on copyright works is copyright infringement. And it's in contrast to, and I think, this language of uncertainty and why, the idea that it's uncertain and it needs clarifying maybe comes a little bit from the situation in the US where things are more uncertain because they have this fair use concept, and fair use is actually kind of much more open-ended than our exclusions. So they sort of say, and that's why we have tons of litigation. There's probably nearly 40 lawsuits now against generative AI companies for training on copyright works. And, there are arguments on both sides. I mean, I still personally, might want to get into this at some point, but I personally still believe that it's not fair use and it is still a copyright infringement, even in the US. I'm not a US lawyer though, but looking at the UK situation, it seems more black and white.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a way of framing it and I think the idea is you frame the current situation as uncertain, frame the kind of the other extreme, which is that like you just say, okay, anyone can use anything for training. You frame that as probably bad as well, but you say that there must be the middle ground, which is where you allow people to use copyright works for training, but you provide them with an opt-out. You say that, well, that's obviously a happy medium, that's good for everyone, and that's kind of the way it's been pushed. But I don't actually think that's true. I think the proposed changes do nothing but weaken copyright law and potentially really harm the creative industries, and I don't really know if there's anything much to be gained from it.
And you say the framing. So, because interestingly, if people try to frame a narrative, then they have to convince somebody to push for that narrative to take place. So for example, let's say, again, in politics, like people try to push a particular narrative so that they can vote for a particular government, etc. But now that we actually have this government, which has the power to say, actually, no, we don't think this is the right thing. So who benefits from this narrative? Because the government obviously knows. I mean, I hope that they do know that our copyright laws in the UK, at least, is pretty solid. It has been, and somebody is trying to convince them, actually, no, we need to kind of weaken it. But we're not in any election years. It's not like they can go back to us, the voters, and say, hey, look, we've created this amazing thing. Vote for us. It just feels to be. It's like no one is benefiting from it. So why are they doing this?
Well, they don't want massive. I mean, there is still a political angle to it. They don't want to have massive pushback. They don't want to sort of be seen as doing something without asking people, and just throwing people under the bus, throwing the creative industry under. They don't want to be seen as doing that. So the way that they're doing it is that they're running a consultation, which, by the way, we're preparing a response to that consultation at the moment.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So they're going to put this consultation out so that they can say that they've done it. And I really hope they will listen to the responses to that consultation, because I think they'll be getting a lot of responses, both from creative industries and even from people working more on the tech side, which would include you and me, saying that, in fact, we don't think these suggestions are the right way forward. But then they want to do the consultation so they can say they've done it, but then they want to frame it. It's psychological anchoring, where you anchor people's expectations in one place, and then you say, but we're offering this brilliant solution where we do a text and data mining exception with an opt-out provision. And because you anchored it in that way, people will be more likely to respond positively to it. And, it's fairly well written. This, if you didn't think about it too much, and you weren't aware of the implications, you could be convinced by the way they've written it that this is a great compromise for everyone. But that's not how I see it.
So for those who basically believe that this is the right way forward, and because one of the typical arguments that I see quite commonly on LinkedIn and everywhere else, especially some of the VCs in Silicon Valley, right? They say, well, actually, this is the best way for us to train AI, etc. Now, from the mathematical perspective, feel free to call the bullshit. I think you're qualified to kind of educate people to say, actually, no, that's not true. I'll go for it. Because I'm not a mathematician. I've got mathematicians working with me, but I'd rather hear it from the horse's mouth.
Well, I mean, the very large scale neural networks, very large scale language models that we have at the moment, they are very data hungry. And, it does seem to be that by feeding these internet scale data sets to them, you can get the best performance out of them. And that's kind of what OpenAI has been doing, and everyone since the kind of arms race began, that's what everyone has been doing. And of course, those companies would like to be told that they're free to use any data that they like. That's convenient for them. And that may be true with the current architectures, but we're also seeing massive improvements where much smaller models are capable of doing things that larger models can. And I think over time we'll find that they'll become much more data efficient as well. And we'll actually end up in a situation where quality of data is as important, or potentially much more important than the quantity of data.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that makes me think that is that if you think of these if you think of current large language models, they're quite blunt instruments. They're quite, they work brilliantly well at certain things. I'm not diminishing their utility, but they require huge amounts of data to do quite simple things. Whereas a human, we don't need much. We consume far, far, far less data to perform any particular task, and we do it with far, far, far higher reliability and, in just a better way. And I think that whilst I don't think I think AI is absolutely miles away from human intelligence, and will be for the foreseeable future. I think that as the models become smarter, we get better at building them, better architectures, and bringing in other ideas rather than just the transformer deep learning. We'll actually find that data efficiency can be improved, and then we won't need to have thrown people under the bus and all of this stuff. So it may in the short term, it might slow things down, slow down some development, but it'll actually direct development in a better direction, which is why I hope we stand by our copyright laws. And I hope in the US, these fair use cases start coming down in the favor of creatives, which is a bigger, who knows if that's going to happen or not, but I hope that is the case. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in the US. It's way too, the level of influence that Silicon Valley has on Trump, it's really unprecedented. Which is kind of weird, because I actually, if you were to ask me a few months ago, and of course, based on the way he sort of behaved himself as president back in 2016, he wouldn't actually stand or capitulate to anybody. Like, people would beg him. He even called out, people like Elon Musk, and said, he would bend down to his knees and beg for contracts, but I would never give it to him. But now he doesn't have that. Now he's actually seems to be giving them whatever they want, which is very interesting. I mean, it's like, I had this conversation actually with a friend of mine recently that he made the point that to him, this is not the same Trump. This isn't the not that I celebrate the idea of this sort of the strong man thing, right? But in 2016, you would not have seen him sitting around with, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and people like that around him telling him what to do. He would literally tell them to piss off. It's like, no, I'll tell you what to do. Even though I don't know what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter. You do what I tell you. But this is not the case right now. And I think it's like, it seems that, I don't know why, or maybe it's his old age or something, but I do, and of course, we don't know yet. We'll see. The administration is not in the office yet at the time of the recording of this episode. But I can't disagree with the arguments that I'm seeing, from analysts and people like that that believe very strongly that effectively it's the tech oligarchs that are going to be running the administration, not Donald Trump. So for me, I think that's why the point I always like to make, I've been making recently in here, that we are, as people, we are on our own, because I don't think government's going to deliver what we need them to deliver. And certainly the Americans are going to do it. The corporations are going to do it. So we have to kind of look for an alternative path, which brings me very nicely, maybe I'm being naive, is Europe potentially the alternative path? Of course, politically, Europe is still not in a very good place. I mean, we've got the new Nazi groups growing in Germany, which is kind of like, what in the hell, right? But that's putting that aside. Is Europe potentially the alternative path? Could Europe potentially stand up and say, well, actually, we're going to prioritize regulation and we're going to prove that regulation does not stifle innovation? Is that a possibility, do you reckon?
I mean, yeah, the EU sort of acts as a counterweight. It has for a long time in a lot of settings as a counterweight to kind of American sort of accelerationism and things. I mean, there's a, you'll see a lot of people who say that, America innovates, Europe regulates, and in a kind of derogatory way to the EU. But actually, the regulations the EU have, they are quite fragmented, and there are it's a very difficult thing to do what they're trying to do. But ultimately, they're standing up for people's rights and their values. And I think that's really important that someone's doing it. The EU is probably the only body big enough to even have a chance of doing that successfully in the current climate. And I'm glad that they're doing it. And I think, the UK, it will be tempted to go along with the US to sort of, so that companies will build data centers in the UK rather than in Europe and all this sort of stuff. But I think they really need to keep an eye on that and sort of think what kind of country do we want to be?
Yeah.
Do we want to throw our values under the bus in order for economic growth? And I think, I'm not saying we necessarily have to align completely with the EU. We have had Brexit for better or for worse, so we don't have to do exactly what they do. But I don't think we should be dismissing the idea of regulation of AI in particular. And for what it's worth, I think the AI Act actually has a lot of good things about it. I think it's actually really quite well thought out, even though there are some definitional issues and perhaps a few points which are going to be difficult to implement. It actually probably gets it right in a lot of other ways.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the problem with Europe in general, that a lot of the regulation over history, I'm not talking about the AI Act specifically, but as you said, that they like to stand against the US out of principle. So it can be a bit ideological sometimes, like some of the regulations that they come up with, it can be a bit ridiculous. Like, I think, I'm not sure how true that is, because I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen people complaining in Europe that apparently they believe that certain regulations would apply if you build an AI model of a particular size. So I can't remember the exact size, but if it's like, let's say if it's 1 trillion parameters or something, right? Something like that, then the regulations apply to that. But if it's anything smaller than that, then it doesn't. Which to me, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in the world of AI, because you don't need huge AI models to cause havoc. Cambridge Analytica didn't use a 1 trillion parameter AI model to create the shenanigans that they created. And to me, I feel this is definitely ideological. They say, we want to go after the big AI companies and the big models. I'm thinking, but see, that is silly. You need to focus on this is definitely ideological. You should look at the power of the AI model, no matter what the size is, because you can, like I said, you can create a small model that is really, really powerful.
I mean, that particular, so that's to do with the systemic risk category.
Yes.
So so obviously we've got different risk categories in the AI apps, and we've got no risk, high risk, and we've got this systemic risk, and it's not the only criteria. So you can't. It's not that if a model is below a certain size, it won't be systemic risk. There are other ways you can fall into that category, but it's actually it's any model which during training uses more than 10 to the 25 flops,
right?
Will automatically go into the systemic risk category. And I mean, it's a pretty blunt way of categorizing things. And as you say, as AI models get smarter, it's going to be possible to train far, far, far more dangerous and advanced models with far fewer operations than that. I mean, I think that's a bit of a strange one. Although actually other places where they have tried to regulate, very powerful AI models, including in California, they do have similar cutoffs like that. It does seem to be like broadly used as I think because LLMs in their current situation are kind of dependent on scale. Just you sort of can, you almost can make a bit of you can certainly draw a correlation between model size and capability. However, I'm already hearing that we're seeing far, far smaller models being more capable than big models. So even now, which is a few months after these regulations were created, it probably doesn't really hold. So and in fact it's even come in the most recent place we've seen that sort of threshold put in is where the US has just so Biden on his way out of the door has introduced export controls on AI technology created in the US, which includes things like NVIDIA chips and stuff, but also models which were trained in the US, or models which were trained on US hardware, which actually, when you think about it, is probably going to include kind of everything. And they're saying that, and they're including at the moment, they're saying models with more than 10 to the 26 flops. So they're saying models over this size, we're going to set controls so you can't move them into countries you can't host these models or the parameters of these models in countries which the US sees as unfriendly or, not top tier. The UK is a top tier country. Most of the EU is top tier, but not all of it. So you're going to have this weird situation where the UK, there's going to be these sort of advanced models. Where the US says you can't move from, say, Germany to somewhere in Eastern Europe, but the EU says it has to be free trade between these countries, and you're going to have all sorts of legal issues around that.
Okay. I wasn't aware of this. I mean, but why? What's the logic behind that? How does that even benefit America?
Well, America wants to stay ahead of other countries in providing AI models. They don't want their intellectual property, basically their model weights, falling into the hands of China or Russia and things like that. So they're going to basically put restrictions on what you can do with that. So they're going to prevent models from going into those countries. I mean, there's export controls on lots and lots of things, but usually it's, and there's usually a national security reason. You're not allowed to, if you invent some sort of new military hardware in the US, you're not allowed to just go and sell it into, the Middle East, like without getting it government cleared. This type of export control that the government's doing on AI there's a bit of that to it, but it's not really about national security. It's more about national dominance. They really they feel that they're in competition, particularly with China.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already, and they're not there's reports that, the Chinese military is using llama models now. So that's sort of shows that the kind of thing they don't want to happen with more advanced models.
But there's also, I mean, there's a massive rise of open source LLMs as well. I mean, it's like literally there are thousands of them everywhere. So it's silly. I mean, in fact, going back to the points, in terms of the copyright and size of the models and stuff. In fact, what we're seeing from my company's point of view, that actually enterprises and businesses, they're not seeing value in the LLMs at all anymore. Actually, to be honest with you, I don't think, certainly the ones I speak to, they're excited about it. They say, okay, it's really amazing, it's powerful, etc. But it always comes back to the ROI, right? It's like the amount of money that they have to spend, to just host these things and to run these things. But the return on that investment to them is just not good enough. Hence the rise of the smaller language models that are more specialized and more verticalized, etc. And this is the thing that I always push for. I'm saying to people that, I mean, again, to me, it's history repeating itself. Because when you see some of the examples that people even see, on YouTube and LinkedIn, etc., say, "Oh, how amazing these LLMs are! It can, I don't know, it can book my holidays, right? Or it can provide me with whatever, cool recipes that I've never thought about." Now, this is not bad, but as an investor, if you spent billions and billions and billions on these things, I think the more, like, you would want something a little bit more than recipes and holiday booking. You know what I mean? And this reminds me so much of IBM. I don't know if you remember with IBM Watson years ago. It was exactly the same sort of thing, because IBM invested ridiculous amount of money on Watson, and I think, if I remember correctly, one of the most reliable applications that people came up with was recipes, and the shareholders were like, "Get the fuck out of here!" It's like, we need to spend all that money so people can do bloody recipes, and that kind of almost was the end of Watson. And I'm thinking, is that the same gonna potentially could happen here? It's like the investors at some point will be like, "All right, guys, what's going on?" You've got a company like DeepMind that spent probably a fraction of that, and they built AlphaFold, which is truly revolutionary. And for me, I guess as a scientist, I always push for how about if we actually build AI models, not necessarily just LLMs. I mean, like there are gazillions of models out there. How about if we actually put the money and focus on things like that, right? Things that actually can revolutionize medicine, revolutionize, scientific research, etc. There's so much we can do with this, and LLMs are great, but it's like they seem to have just sucked all the attention, all the cash. And the return is what? Booking holidays? Are you for real?
Yeah. I mean, this is a really good point. And LLMs, the thing that they have achieved, which is what's really impressive about them, is that they've provided us with a fairly useful natural language interface to a computer. And absolutely, I think that's we haven't had that before, and that unlocks loads of things. So LLMs, for that reason, are always going to be part of the conversation. Now, whether or not it's the current sort of paradigm of transformers and things to create LLMs, I'm not sure, but there will always we'll need some language model as an interface. But then I think as you say, I don't think in itself that creates enough return on the investment for companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and so on. So they have to think of other ways other sort of USPs of ways that they can extract value from these things. And there are a few issues. First of all, they are quite unreliable in that hallucinations are not a solved problem, and it means that you can't use them for a lot of things. I mean, you talk about recipes there, but even with recipes, there were cases where Google's AI has been telling people to cook deadly mushrooms and things that kind of went viral. Yeah. So you can't. I think as soon as you start outsourcing a deeper, like more things to the LLM itself, you're going to run into problems. They're not reliable enough, particularly, and not an enterprise. People might use them for their own personal stuff, and might kind of write a little story for you or do something fun, and that's fine. But that's just a toy. If you want it to be useful in enterprise settings, they have to be a lot more reliable.
Yeah,
and they can be. There are things you can do. You can anchor them into kind of workflows with kind of lots of mitigating switches and things that'll tell it to stop if something doesn't seem to be working. But overall, they're not that trustworthy. Whereas more sort of, as you say, kind of more verticalized AI systems, which do certain thing very well. They're not trained on these enormous data sets usually. They're good at a specific thing. Actually, you can get a lot more value from that. So it might be that LLMs provide a language interface, but the actual hard work or the kind of serious work is done by other types of models, which are just more reliable. And that might be the direction. That might be the direction of travel.
I mean, I've seen, I don't know, if you've seen some research already coming up with alternative to the transformer technology to deal with the hallucination problem, etc. I mean, I'm not directly personally in touch with that. But I mean, are you aware of any models emerging right now that it basically, might potentially eliminate the need for the transformer technology?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are competing types of models. There's, a while ago there was the kind of Mambo model, and then there's XLSTMs, which are a sort of a bit of an advance on LSTM models, which came before transformers. There are competing things, and the question of whether we. But I think that maybe they're still kind of based on similar-ish paradigm. They're still working on next token prediction from a massive text corpus, and ultimately so you can kind of imagine that what the model's really doing is that as you're feeding its data, it's building this distribution, this probability distribution over what next tokens are going to be for whatever combination of tokens you've got at the moment. And that's fine. They can become very good at predicting what the next token will be and therefore putting out plausible answers. But it's quite a superficial way of doing things. It's quite a superficial way of understanding, or it isn't really understanding. And even other architectures which are based on which are still language models, possibly can't do that. I'm not sure a language model can ever really be the right way to certainly move towards what people are talking about as AGI. But I think if I leave aside AGI, I think even reliable AI might need something more than that, because we as humans, we don't learn loads of learn loads of language and then just fit the pattern of language to a new setting. That's just not how we think. We have more abstract concepts of what things are. I know certain things about you, and I fill in the gaps and sort of guess other things about you and about other things that are in our environment at the moment, and I make mental links between those things. And then if I want to, I can articulate it in language, but it's almost like the last step. Whereas language models, and certainly large language models, kind of do it the wrong way around, and that's why they're unreliable. They don't have a true world model.
Which is the reason why I think, I can't remember if I said this somewhere recently, it was here or in the whatever speech or something like that, where I made the point that for me, and that's probably a controversial point, as you said, LLMs are brilliant user interface. So, because this is something that actually those of us involved in tech for a long time, I mean, I remember even back probably in 2010, even before 2010, there were conversations about whether, when are we going to get rid of the mouse and monitor? When are we going to be in a situation where we can just instruct our computer just to do stuff? Hey, just write me a document about this, boom, 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 boom. So that interest, that ambition was always there. And I think LLMs now finally have done that, in the sense that you can literally have, obviously you can have conversations, but ultimately, what is the point of these conversations? But you can absolutely interact in this really dynamic way with your, with your software and stuff, which I think is cool. I personally, I love that. This is something that I thought, man, about time. But the issue is the fact that people take it beyond that now. Like, people don't see it as an interface. They do actually see it as we see two problems. That people think that it is genuinely intelligent, but there is no intelligence there. Or even worse, people want to outsource their own thinking to these unintelligent machines to do the thinking for them. Hence, we see the issues that, we talked about before, about how children, for example, get confused. Because children, for example, they get attached to these things, thinking that they're alive, and they start listening to the things that they say to them, oh, go harm yourself. Oh, okay. Things like that. Yeah. But we're seeing that with adults too. We see that, people who, trigger warning, but committed suicide because these models told them to do so, or they thought it was a better idea for them to do that. It's like a solution. I mean, I think this is the problem here. This is where I feel like the regulation needs to kind of play some kind of role, that you can't, you have to add some kind of guardrails where these LLMs say, hey, I can't make that decision for you, right? Or that I don't know. Well, of course, that's not how they work, right?
No, because they don't know. They don't know that they don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you. I think that one of the side effects, an unfortunate side effect of having a natural language interface like an LLM, is that we as humans associate language with a higher intelligence, with our intelligence, because we're the only beings that we're aware of that use language in the way we do. So we kind of think that they're intrinsically tied. So it's kind of hacked the human condition a bit by making us believe that something is intelligent because it's good with language. And therefore you end up with people, as you say, start to outsource thinking to it. And I think I'd say one other thing is that they also will eventually outsource intent to it. So
yes.
And that's where the real worries come in for me, because, I don't really, if someone wants to outsource their thinking on writing a blog about something inane and then they put it up on the internet, it's going to fill the internet with a bit more slop, but hasn't done too much harm. But over time, if people become more and more hooked on these models, or more and more used to using them, incorporate them into their life more in the way that, for example, Mustafa Suleyman from Microsoft would like us to believe we should, then eventually you actually start to outsource your intent. And I think once you do that, you're putting your intent as a human in the hands of some companies which don't necessarily have the greatest track record of human rights and so on. And I think, we might see it actually really, really mirrors some of the things that happen with social media.
Yes.
So let's look at, if we go back to, the early days of Facebook, it was really great. And it was a cool thing to have. Suddenly we're able to share things with our friends more easily. And it really was about connecting people. Whether or not Zuckerberg's grand plan was already emerging, I don't know, but it had utility and people got into it and got hooked on it. And actually, I think social media could have been quite a positive thing. The problem is, once it got into the hands of, once capitalism really kicked in and the algorithms were now used to maximize engagement in order to bring in more advertising revenue, then it turned out that, and it was never Mark Zuckerberg or anyone else's intention to, cause, all of it, cause teen suicides or cause, civil wars and this kind of stuff. It wasn't. But once you just chase profit and you allow algorithm to do whatever it'll do to achieve that, you find that the most effective way to do it was to divide people and to create conflict and to really fuel the rise of the far right. That particular politics seems to match well with that goal. So that's what happened with social media, and now you end up with these kind of real cesspits that's kind of the story of social media for me, and it's coming to a head at the moment with what's going on with Facebook removing its checking and Musk going mad all over Twitter. But I think we could easily see something very similar or potentially worse happen with generative AI if we allow it to just be controlled by huge companies which are after profits, because it can influence people so well because of its language skills that you can end up pushing people to do things that they might not have already, or to think in a way that they wouldn't have alternatively. You might be doing it commercial aim, it might be that you're trying to tell, you might be telling the model that you need to, maybe someone's paid Meta to get the model to
say certain things,
buy their shops, or say certain things, then that might be what the model does. But in order to achieve that, you don't know what's going to happen. You talk about guardrails and that's, and regulation. And I think guardrails are important, but it's quite a challenging problem to have guardrails on these such big open-ended problems. Particularly as you pointed out, the models they'll always be giving you an answer. They'll always be trying to do something. It's quite hard to have just an off switch where it goes like, no. And it can catch extreme stuff. The model may be able to catch, if you say to it, tell me how to make a bomb, it might, you can have things that catch, you can have classifiers which will catch that kind of stuff. But more insidious, kind of slower changing of behavior, that's not going to be caught by any guardrail.
Yeah, I mean, talking of the bomber, I think I saw an article somewhere that the Cybertruck bomber apparently used ChatGPT to advise him of what to do, which is horrible. But this is actually, you made a good point, because in fact, the thing that really does annoy me a lot is when some of these people in social media and they try to claim that we didn't see this coming or whatever. I'm like, bullshit. Absolute bullshit, because like I said, you know that I say this, but it's just for the listeners. It's like, for over 10 years, myself and many others that were involved in AI, we were saying, do not deploy AI on the web, on social media, unless there are guardrails, right? And at the time, you mentioned a good point that, putting the guardrails now, it's almost an impossible task, because it's so big now. But 10 years ago, it was possible. We had the opportunity to actually put guardrails, and it wouldn't have stifled anything really, but at least there would have been a much higher chance that a child would not see a video of self-harm, way higher, right? And it's like, what they've done, they just said, no, let's just, as you said, prioritize profit, and they still do that today. I saw another article today, by the way, because Zuckerberg announced that he wants to cancel all the what's the term?
The fact checkers.
The fact checkers, etc. And it's going to be community noted. Well, it turns out somebody, it's a leak apparently, that they would allow, if you were to pay for the content, they wouldn't put any kind of community notes on it. So you can literally pay Meta to spread any kind of misinformation you like, because you paid for it. Nobody can add any community notes to it.
Yeah,
and it's crazy.
Yeah, well, it's just maximizing profit out of these things, and the company like Meta is probably struggling to grow its profits naturally now, because it's already maxed out the users in the world. Like, it might be losing users, or it might have a stable number of users, but it's not like, it had a very good run where over a decade, the number of users, of the internet users, was increasing, and the number of social media users was increasing steadily. So a company like Meta could continue to grow its profits and show growth, which is great for them. But that's probably capping out a bit now. So they have to find other ways to be showing growth. And
they might buy TikTok US.
Yeah. Well, they might.
Yeah,
that would be something. But generative AI is part of their strategy for doing that. There's a good reason why Meta is into the game of generative AI. It's because it sees it as a way of increasing its advertising revenue, in my opinion, and that's what they'll do. That's what their business is.
Yeah.
And I think, all the stuff about, removing fact checkers and things, that's a pure, they're doing that to appease Donald Trump and his administration. They sort of, they hide behind free speech and say that we're being neutral by doing this, but actually, there's nothing neutral about it, because their algorithms, as I've sort of said earlier, their algorithms aren't neutral. The algorithms are, whether or not it's intentional, and I don't know to what extent there's any input into this, but if we give them the benefit of the doubt, and the algorithm is pursuing a neutral goal, that doesn't mean a neutral outcome necessarily. You can still end up with an algorithm which pushes certain political views far more than others, and which try to sow division wherever possible, and that seems to be what we have. And they're not trying to fix that. So, if it was free speech, they would, it's free speech, but it's algorithmically inflated free speech, where certain speech is platformed and certain speech isn't. So they can't really say that they're sort of, they can't really use that as an excuse, I don't think.
Well, that's the point actually I made in one of the recent episodes as well, where I made the point that, whether you agree, I mean, again, it's not a political point, that whether you agree with the MAGA movement or not, the idea that they're going to be pushing a narrative that is pro-MAGA and nothing else, that in itself is a very bad thing for the internet, for AI, the future of AI in general. Like, the model collapse risk is actually, I think, is higher than ever before, because we're already seeing a hell of a lot more AI generated slop. And I'm seeing different figures. I mean, some people, I've seen somebody even claiming that now 70% of all of the new content they see on the web that, since 2014, 2024, and till now, 70% is AI generated. I'm not sure if it's that high, but it's pretty high.
That sounds high. But then again, if you think about how much less work there is to create slop than there is to create human generated content, it's sort of believable, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm not dismissing it. I'm just trying to deny that fact. It's like how the hell did we get here? So the model collapse risk is happening. I think it will happen. I mean, I described it like, I think you probably saw the episode, the Internet of Shit. I mean, this is basically what's happening in 2025. That could be the era where we potentially going to kill the internet as we know it. I mean, the internet is designed to share information freely and equally, regardless of who you are, what your political interests are, whatever. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore.
No, and exactly, and it may also, it may mean that we go past a peak in sort of the utility of the internet for data for training models, and then we really will need, because when you get to that point and it's no longer a viable option to be scraping everything from the internet willy-nilly, then you do need to be more careful about your data and have something that's more a kind of a more considered approach to data, and look for quality data and try and learn more from less data. And that's where I think AI needs to go anyway. So, in some ways the slop might help. It'll destroy the internet as we know it, but it might actually nudge innovation in AI, ironically, in a better direction. That would be my hope. But it's a shame that it would have to come at the cost of, of really what our internet commons, our sort of, shared source of information.
Well, there's the thing that frustrates me, because, as I said, that we warned about this, but for us, it's more like, I admitted that I'm being naive when I believe truly 10, 20 years ago, even, that, with technology, we can make the world a better place. I mean, that was something I truly believed in. And perhaps at the time, maybe we didn't have the technology, but that's what we were striving for. The cohort that I was part of in Google Campus, with DeepMind and all of these guys. I mean, I say this repeatedly because I want people to remember this, that none of the startups there, certainly from the ones I've met and have seen, were there just, because we want to dominate. Everybody was trying to actually fix a problem. In my case, it was to fix the misinformation problem, which was a problem already. Obviously, DeepMind, scientific problems. There are loads of other companies that were, looking for better ways for cybersecurity, things like that. So we were all actually working towards something that is designed to help society, businesses, humanity, whatever. And I just find it frustrating that we reached this point that was avoidable. And we have to get it, like you said, I agree with you that I think effectively shit has to hit the fan for people to realize that, oh my God, we're in deep trouble now. We need to kind of reverse. So I guess the question is, can we reverse? Do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a difficult one to answer. I think that we are still we're kind of close to the peak of hype, I think, at the moment with AI, and it's sort of, it's seen as a bit of a...
We're seeing the noises that already starting to call it out more aggressively.
Yeah, a little bit more. You're starting to, and I think that the market will start to rationalize quite quickly. And I'm hoping that will start to come this year, where people start to be a little bit more, because basically we've had this race situation where, because it wasn't well understood early on, ChatGPT comes out and then GPT-4 comes out, and these are impressive advances in the field. And because it's being sort of put out there, all of the big tech companies sort of see the potential, and even though they don't know yet how it's going to be useful, they don't know how they're going to make money from it. What they do know is they don't want it to, they're worried that it might be incredibly powerful and completely transform the economy. Their calculus is that might happen. If that's happening, we have to be in control of that. We have to have a piece of that. So they go for it, and they all have the same thinking, and they throw so much resources into it. And they have this sort of mitigating thought that, oh, well, it's going to be useful having loads more data centers, even if this stuff doesn't help, even this stuff doesn't work out as well as we're hoping. And I think that's why, and in order to maximize the chance of making some money off it, they then, fueled enormous amounts of hype about it, and people have bought into it. So generally, you're seen as a true Luddite if you say anything against generative AI these days.
You and I've been accused of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure I have as well. But which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Nobody supports innovation in AI more than I do, more than you do. It's just that this has been allowed to, this has gone off on a sort of runaway train path, and still people don't know what it's for, really.
Yeah.
And I would probably say that there will be elements of this which will be taken and be useful and be incorporated into products and be, it is going to rationalize soon, I think. I'm not sure that the current sort of level of excitement about it is going to last, about generative AI and about these models which can do everything for you. I think we're going to hopefully be able to take the bits which are useful, and people just start to think a bit more rationally about what it's for and what it's not for, and when it should be used and when it really shouldn't be used, because so many of the use cases are absolute garbage. Like they really, I really don't like to see any prose written by an AI, because when I read something, I want it to be I really want it to reflect the views of a human, because that's why I'm reading it. And even if you give it a prompt, say, write me something about this, I think unless I think if it's written by a generative AI model, then it's not that person's thought. It's like, you just, in that case, just give me the prompt. If you're going to write prompt for me to write some, I don't know, a blog post or an article or, a book, I want that to be your intent.
Yes.
So I would like you to write it yourself. And if you can't be bothered to do that, just send me the prompt send me what you're going to put in the prompt, and that's all I care about. I don't care do not care what the language model puts in the gaps. I'd rather just filter that out. And that's just me. And I think like, a lot of people would find that a quite a distasteful view. They'd say I'm fighting against progress or something, but it's not, in my opinion.
Yeah. Actually, you just reminded me, I connected with somebody yesterday. She's an author. I'm not sure if I should be mentioning her name, but she did, she put a brilliant post. I thought this has to be the post of 2025, that the best prompt engineers are the writers. I was like, amen. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you know what? And the more of their writing they put into that prompt, the better it's going to be. To the and that's true all the way to the maximum, which is that they just write it themselves. That's the best.
Yeah. I mean, you see, because one of the things, like, for example, like even for this podcast, like one of the things that we do, because we've got our own deployment of Gen AI. So it's kind of personalized, whereby it knows me very well. It knows sort of my approach and stuff. This is kind of part of the experiment. But even then, like what I do, for example, to summarize an episode like this one. Now, for me personally, if I were to summarize it on my own, it will take me forever, because that means I have to watch the whole, or rather even read the transcript in its entirety. But what I do is, like, of course, because I've got that private deployment, it knows me. So I say to it, okay, look, this is the latest episode that I've done. Can you summarize it for me, please, based on such and such and such parameters? Okay. And it does that. But the thing is, I still have to read it. I still read it. I want to make sure that it actually does have the essence of the discussion. But I tend to add extras myself nonetheless. Like, I don't just sort of blindly say, hey, just do it. And to me, you see, this is where generative AI can be super useful. 100%. Yeah. But what I don't get is, like, when journalists now, I mean, I think, was it Bloomberg that said that they want to get rid of some of their journalists and use generative AI? I'm like, are you for real? Seriously? I don't want to read. That's a really good. Read your slop.
No, that's a point. And I think summarization, taking something big, either a big document or a podcast like this, and turning it into a summary, generative, I think, provided you as I say, you review it, and particularly if you can give it enough prompt engineering to do something that's aligned with how you would want to summarize it. Yeah. That is a great use case. And again, you with all the caveats that you need to check it and make sure it doesn't hallucinate anything. So that kind of makes sense. I think more, you've seen on LinkedIn the posts where people have obviously just put a sort of basic prompt in and ChatGPT's fill in the gaps, and or just an automated bot responding to something in the most bland way possible. This is the kind of slot that I just don't want to read at all. I feel like I can sniff it out immediately. I think as soon as I see something like that, I'm not going to read this. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not saying that there are no use cases of generative AI. I mean, summarization is a really good one.
Yeah. And it kind of brings me nicely to the point is that who is actually buying into it right now? Because to be honest with you, as I said, I don't think businesses ever bought into it. I mean, like the interest was there. You do see all these surveys, I don't know, whatever, 70, 80% of, CEOs, they're showing interest in AI. But in reality, interest does not mean that they would invest into it, because their CFO, I speak to CFOs, and CFOs say, yeah, I want the ROI. I am yet to, I did not see or meet any CFO that felt that the ROI was justifiable for them to invest the amount of money that they would invest. Like they would try to do different things. So the business community was never fully sold into it. Yet you've got companies, of course, like Microsoft and Google, they're literally pushing Copilot or Gemini in case of Google into your products, not because you asked for it. They're literally they're pushing it in because they kind of want to convince you, no, you've got to use AI. You need to use AI. So the hype, in my opinion, this is why I kind of called them out. I work, especially Microsoft. I mean, that Microsoft actually helped my company in a big way. So I did a lot of love and respect to them. So when I call them out, it's more like, if your friend screws up, you got to say, hey, dude, what are you doing? Come on, don't do that. You don't need to do that. So that's what I do here. And I feel it's just ridiculous that they're kind of effectively shoving AI into everything in a way that is like, I'm like, yeah, but I don't want it. Why are you giving it to me?
And they're using sort of dark patterns to force it on people as well. They just, a lot of it's done in an opt-out. I mean, I call it opt-out with friction, which is where is basically they automatically add something and you have to intentionally opt out of it, but they make it slightly difficult to do.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what seems to be happening at the moment. And by the way, we've got Copilot, and we're trialing various things with it. And I think I think we'll find uses for it. Things like summarization and, maybe some sort of very basic automated, sort of agentic workflows could be useful within the business. And I think that's, worth exploring. But it doesn't justify just the level of hype which is being put out there. And I think that and again, it's kind of like this idea, I think it's really helpful to think of it as an interface. I think, thinking of the LLM as summarization, we're using the LLM as an interface between our podcast, us speaking in the natural language, and text, and it can compress it down, and it kind of works in that way. It's kind of performs quite a mechanical task in that way. And it can put a bit of a spin on things as well, which is a bit of a bonus. So that's great, but it's not creating any. It's not doing any thinking for us, really. It's not doing any. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's accurately and faithfully representing what we said in this podcast. And there are lots of use cases like that where I think AI is just, generative AI is just a useful type of model, just like convolutional neural networks were a good way to start getting to process image data. And, we have lots of things where computer vision is used, and they use these kind of AI models because they're dealing with image data. And I think, we'll use LLMs when we're dealing with language data for various tasks. And that's great. But to sort of try to extrapolate that into, right now we've got an intelligence working with us. I just don't think that's what we've got. And I don't think I think that's what the AI companies would like us to believe.
Absolutely,
that they're selling us, but they're not. They're selling us something far, far more vanilla and possibly useful still, but just far, far less ambitious than what they would like to say it is. And I find these OpenAI's sort of 01, 03 models and things, they're supposed to be far more advanced, but they still have all exactly the same problems. They're just putting huge amounts more inference compute in to almost hoodwink us slightly more, to make us believe it slightly more. But the same applies still, I think.
Is that then, I suppose we've got to be careful here, especially from your point of view as a lawyer. But going back to the point about how people have been convinced that they need to outsource their thinking to these models, right? To an extent, even they believe that these models are even their friends and that kind of thing. I mean, should we then, who is there to blame? Because at the end of the day, I mean, I think families of all these children that have suffered or committed suicide and the adults done the same and so on, they would have to blame somebody and say, hey, you guys lied to my kids, or because of your hype, my kids actually believed that your AI model is their friend. And now we're suffering the consequences from that. I mean, is there, because I tend to kind of blame I always say I blame the tech bros, people that want to sell courses or whatever. They always try to overhype something because it's for their financial benefits. But ultimately, I mean, they are just sort of the byproduct of that. But ultimately, it's the companies surely that, they've pushed this narrative, say, this thing is AGI, this thing is, and they use this typical thing that I've seen so much in tech or my entire life, where they try to, this is so dangerous. Remember like how Musk and some else would say, oh, this is so dangerous. It can destroy humanity, but I'm the one who's going to save it or save you from it or something like that. All of that makes people think, people who don't understand AI. And again, this is not an attack. Why should you understand AI? It's not your job. You're not the engineer. You're not the tech entrepreneur. And I said this so many times as well, that as far as I'm concerned, the tech sector, we failed in being honest and transparent with the general public over many, many years, which is the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I feel, what, enough is enough. We need to speak out. But is it fair for me to say that all of these, psychological issues that we see with people from social media and AI should be blamed, the blame should be targeted towards the actual companies, the CEOs or whoever that pushes that narrative that, this thing is so amazing, it's so powerful, it's even better than humans, which of course it's not.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of, there's legal liability, and that's a big question that's kind of gonna be thrashed out in the coming years. The EU is considering new liability regimes for AI to go alongside with the AI Act, which I think is very sensible. Aside from that, in the US, where they probably won't do that, but at a federal level, there's going to have to be lawsuits, and we'll find out where the liability legally sits. But when it comes to sort of morally speaking, you usually need to follow the money, don't you? You need to see where who's benefiting from the systems, the algorithms which are causing these harms, and have they had opportunities to prevent them, and have they chosen profit over taking action? And if the answer is yes to that, then it's pretty, to me, that sort of you can squarely point a finger of blame at them. Yeah.
Legally speaking, do you mean, or generally as?
Well, it's too difficult to say. Legally speaking is just it's really, really challenging to answer that. I'm more saying kind of what I feel in my heart.
Yeah. As a society, as people, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we're not able to. It's not like false advertising, because because false advertising is an issue in most. That's a legal issue in most countries, where you're not allowed to say that your product does something when it basically doesn't. That's controlled by law. That's regulated by law. But we're in a sort of weird situation with AI, which it's hard to prove what's right and wrong, and people can kind of claim whatever they like. And there's people are allowed to market in whatever they are, whatever the way they like, so long as they don't say something that's kind of completely untrue. But I think so there's not really much kind of guidance as to what if you're an AI company and you want to sell this product, what do you need to watch out for? There just isn't much of that. So what naturally happens is that they make the most grandiose claims that they possibly can, and they're also in competition with other people they're all at it. And it's almost, if you don't make the big claim, then your competitor will, so you'll have to do it. And everyone, I think, ends up getting a bit misled. And the voices that I would most, you can't out of hand dismiss things that people say, even tech bros, but you have to, whatever claims are being made by Elon Musk, Sam Altman, anyone who's a sort of pushing AI from the top level, it needs to be tempered with the understanding that they're trying to sell a product and they're in an arms race at the moment. What I would really like to see here is more sort of academic voices, which don't have skin in the game. They understand the systems as well as the tech, well, much more probably than the tech CEOs, but as much as the engineers who are working in those companies. But they are free to say whatever they like. And actually, if you do listen to what the academics are saying, and I am connected with quite a few of them on LinkedIn, they're far, far more reserved about what they say generative AI can and can't achieve. And they're far more forthright with saying there are massive risks and it needs to be regulated. And I mean, I don't see why they would say that if it wasn't true, because that's they have no reason to say it otherwise. So
why? I mean, I suppose maybe it's I suppose for the tech, like I said, that we made a huge mistake that that very few of us, well, I said me included, I wasn't vocal enough, and maybe I should have been. But I think maybe it's going back to the point that I said at the beginning of the episode that, they're all stuck inside their little bubbles. Perhaps there are tech entrepreneurs that believe that this is it. This is the AGI moment that everybody's been dreaming about. And they believe that it's a good thing. And obviously their shareholders behind them, obviously they don't care about any of that. They say, okay, look, this is really good IP here. We can just sell it and make shitloads of money. But then with academics, I agree with you. I mean, this is something I'm also quite disappointed that there are very few academics. I mean, obviously Gary Marcus is probably the most famous one. That's been vocal for 20 plus years or something like that. Mm-hmm. But there are many other amazing academics like him, but they're nowhere near as vocal. Why? It's like, what are they scared of? It's like they don't have shareholders to worry about. So why aren't they, being out there more?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some of them are, but they may not be, maybe not all academics are sort of naturally inclined to kind of get on their soapbox too much. And they also just don't have the platform to compete with the platform that big tech has. It's the biggest platform, and it really is, big tech controls the flow of information largely in the world. So even if a lot of academics speak out, they're going to get drowned out by the sort of the power
PR machine,
of the PR machine. Yeah. So I think, I think that's a shame, but I think if you want to have a kind of, I think we should be seeking out the views of them and maybe amplifying them as well, amplifying what they have to say. Because I don't think doing that is being biased in a particular direction. I think to do this in a kind of academically, to think about this in an academically rigorous way, you can't just listen to what's coming out of Silicon Valley and what's coming out of the tech companies. You really have to listen to people who, as I said, don't have skin in the game so much.
Yeah, well, which is the reason why I've got this podcast, because I'm trying to get these guys on boards as much as possible. I mean, which actually brought me to one point that I actually really wanted to talk, going back to the UK and the EU, because it's like everything that we've just highlighted, I think listeners probably would have noticed that we talked about purely American companies, because that's the level of influence that they have on the world, which is the reason why I think the internet will be dead, because literally we've got three dudes at the top of the helm that controlling the world's information ecosystem, which is, to me, it's ridiculous. So how do we I made a point actually today, like sort of short aside, the video, you probably saw it on LinkedIn, where I was ranting about the UK government plans, which for me is a phenomenal plan. And I'll put a link in the description for the listeners if they want to read it and so on. But the idea that we can become the world leader in AI. Now, firstly, there are two things I always like to emphasize. When they say, we want to become, no. We were the AI leaders already, right? Until, of course, Brexit, and that was the end of it. So for me, I think we need to change the language, and we want to regain our leadership. So that I think it changes the argument a little bit more. It changes the narrative that we want to regain it. But this idea that we somehow could do that on our own, and I even don't believe that if we choose to align ourselves with the US, that will make us any. No, we just got to be, US's bitch. That's at best. But if we are part of the EU ecosystem, now I don't know if we can rejoin. Politically speaking, I think it's impossible. Sure, I mean, in the short term, long term, I don't know. But in the here and now, in my opinion, I think the UK needs to go back into this really strong alignment with the EU, because it's that the combination of the UK, EU, I mean, together we can absolutely stand up against the Silicon Valley for sure. So how do we get rid of this dependence on the US Silicon Valley?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is when access to the kind of capital and resources that they have in the US, we're not going to get to anytime soon in the UK. So I don't think
not even Europe. Not even Europe.
No, not even Europe.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Not even if we all of the EU and UK club together.
Exactly.
But I think it is what it is, and the US will always play a central role in pushing technology forward in this area. But I think we're not going to, we need to. I think we're not going to beat the US at its own game. And I think at the moment, the game is building bigger and bigger data centers, training bigger and bigger LLMs, and kind of trying to go for this kind of winner takes it all approach.
Yeah.
I think that what the UK could potentially do is, we do have a pretty thriving AI startup scene. And I think that, there's going to be steps towards galvanizing that centered around London, but elsewhere in the UK as well.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of need to support things that are, because I've already made clear, both I think already in this podcast, but also in my LinkedIn posts, things that I think that this particular trajectory in AI is going to run out of steam.
Yeah.
And the ROI probably isn't going to be there. And things are going to change. And I think we will, AI is now on the agenda, and there's way more money flowing into AI research generally and things. But it's still it's all going into LLM training and stuff that, it's based on this. It's all just the same idea. It's I think Gary Marcus calls it intellectual monoculture, which I think is a good way to say it.
Yeah.
But it's a huge opportunity cost. And I think what we shouldn't be doing is in the UK trying to do the same. We shouldn't be saying, maybe we do need to be training some foundation models in the UK, sure, but I don't think we need to be saying, right, we're going to try and outdo OpenAI. We're going to try and outdo Anthropic.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that. What we need to do is think, right, we need to, the government needs to be supporting companies which really are going to have a real shot at providing massive benefits to the population.
Yeah.
And getting the conditions right, both regulatory, in terms of investment, to support those kind of things. And I think in that way, we won't waste loads of the resources we do have on chasing something we're never going to be leaders at. And it's just not really that much point, really. There's, if we want LLMs, there's tons of them to choose from now. And maybe I'm not saying we shouldn't have any British LLMs, maybe we should, but it would be sad to see all of this AI opportunities action plan, this kind of energy, which it hopefully will give people in the industry to sort of think, right, we're really going to go for it here. It would be nice for that to be targeted into useful things. And I think in that way, we could have outstanding AI companies which provide real value. They might not be $1 trillion businesses. Maybe they will. Maybe there will be one that is. But I think that's what we should be doing. We can become leaders in applied AI and in responsible AI. That's what we should be trying to do. And as you correctly said, we should be trying to do this in combination with companies in Europe. And we should be trying to work with European companies and aligning ourselves with them.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing that Europe and the UK are good at, and better than America, is that there are more government funds available for research and development than there are in America. America is much more focused on, the VC class to put all the cash in, which for me, I think that's the problem now. For AI, it's a clear conflict of interest. We've talked about a lot of areas that's like, it shows that basically VCs do what the VCs do. They have to prioritize profit, which is, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's their nature. They have to do that if they are to exist. It's their business model. But if we're talking about, as you said, to develop AI models and solutions that are there to solve particular problems, like say in healthcare or the environment, etc. Okay, there's not much money in that, perhaps, but at least as a government, your job is to make sure that your people, your citizens, are well looked after. You can't rely on VCs to do that. I mean, VCs told me directly to my face that Tim, why are you focusing all this ethics bullshit? I'm like, well, it's not really bullshit, but it's bullshit to them because it's something that is more expensive. It takes more time. It's not as profitable, whatever. I mean, individually, I'm sure they believe in ethics personally, but as VCs, it's just not their thing. It's like they're not. If the government tells them, "Hey, can you please invest in that startup that focuses on ethics or whatever?" They're like, "No." So there needs to be. I think they've got to be a little bit more creative. And I even talked about this with somebody even ages ago. That we introduced, for example, the EIS and the SCIS scheme, which played a big role in making London what it is way back in the day, especially the SCIS. Where, I mean, again, because we've got listeners who are not based in the UK. So this is a scheme where the government, I can't remember under which prime minister, a long time ago, where they were saying, okay, the investors are not investing in seed startups enough, but we need to support seed startups in the tech sector, etc. So they introduced this scheme whereby they're telling investors, look, invest this amount, at the time was £150,000, into a seed startup that is less than 3 years old. And we basically guarantee your investment through tax incentives, massive, massive tax incentives. So if you put 150K here, with your right hand, you're going to get, the same back through tax incentives, even more.
Yeah.
I think that's genius. And it worked. It absolutely, gazillions of investors. I remember we had a flood of bankers basically coming through the door, which is great. And I think there has to be something like that for AI, surely, that they say, look, the government can't fund everything. I mean, the government is broke and whatever, fair enough. But if you're a VC that would invest in an AI startup or any, not just AI, but a deep tech startup, something like DeepMind, right? Even my company, a company that focuses on, the issues that might not necessarily be profitable, but they are really important issues that we absolutely need to support for society, the environment, healthcare, blah, blah, blah. You invest in that, we'll give you incentives. So you're not going to lose your money. There has to be something like that. And I'm not seeing any action towards that.
Yeah. And that's what I'd really like to see happen. I just think that this, alongside this drive for investment in AI in the UK, it has to be incentivized in the right way.
Yeah.
And I think it's not right to say that these kind of areas aren't potentially profitable. If you're solving problems, you can make money from it, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think we can, I think maybe we can skip a stage. I think we can almost maybe skip a stage, because I think that, as I said earlier, I think there's going to be rationalization in the market for AI, VC money and everything, where, the ROAs aren't going to be there on the big, foundation model training companies and things. And, there's lots of reasons for that, but we don't need to try and do that. We should just be trying to focus on solving problems using AI, and we should be using this opportunity. The fact that AI is now high profile and there's more money to go into it, people are the government's willing to support this kind of investment. We should go, okay, but we're not going to do it. We're going to be looking at targeted things, and as you say, tax incentives is a great way to do that. But it can just apply to nearly every sector. Look at every sector, outside the tech sector, which has problems. To talk about healthcare, we could talk about automotive, we could talk about even defense. Everything. I mean, it's all on the table, and AI can help with all of these things to some extent. And we should be, and people who want to solve problems in those areas should be the ones we should be supporting. That's what I think there's an opportunity for. And I think that's what we need to be pushing towards. And those are the kind of companies. I mean, I'm very lucky to work with a lot of companies who do AI, and quite a lot of them fit well within that category. They're companies who work in a particular sector. They're doing really clever things with AI, but it's vertical. It's in a particular vertical, and they can show you with simple graph how they're improving something in their industry, how they're improving efficiencies, how they're improving, reducing costs, or how they're, improving, performance, whatever it is. And, that's what I want to see more of.
The current plan doesn't have that, does it? It's all mostly on data centers, and as you said, it's pretty focused on generative AI as well. They say AI, but they really mean generative AI, isn't it?
They seem to, but I think I don't know. I think that's kind of data centers is not a bad thing to be investing in. I don't think we need tons and tons of data centers that are going to massively increase the electricity bill of the country. But most companies do. We need data centers. I mean, even companies who are running any kinds of AI models, whether or not generative, if they have access to high quality compute, it's going to be a good thing. So I'm kind of okay with that, so long as it's done, so long as it's apportioned correctly.
Yeah,
I think investing in compute is good. And whether, I mean, perhaps you can read the sort of action plan as being quite generative AI focused. But I also think I don't think that that's set in stone. I think if there are clear routes to invest, routes to monetization and return on investment that don't have anything to do with generative AI, then that would work well. And by the way, I think there are valid, I think there are generative AI use cases as well, which could be really valuable that solve problems. I mean, generative AI is only, it's just a type of, it's
one type of AI
model. It's one type of AI model. There's discriminative models, there's predictive models, there's generative models, and generative models are part of the whole, the technology area.
Yeah.
And we, sometimes they may be the best thing to use. It's just the sort of the idea of these gigantic, kind of, I don't know, it's the drive to AGI really. That's the thing I think we shouldn't be getting involved in. This because I think that's just not going to happen with the current technology, and it's a money drain. And these tech companies can be competing to kind of try and nudge closer and closer and things, but I don't think they're going to get there. I think we should be way more targeted with what we're doing with AI.
I speak to actually talking of AGI. I wanted to ask you just for funsies, as my kids say, because I say I have yet to meet. I mean, I think probably there were a couple of mathematicians that I saw on LinkedIn that are very pro AGI, but then they have their own definition of AGI. But I would say it's anecdotal, but like 90% of mathematicians that I've met, they just think it's complete utter nonsense. So what's your opinion on AGI? Is it just crap? Is it complete? I mean, I personally never I agreed with it. I mean, I thought it's like I don't see the point. Again, the ROI. I mean, what is it for? But from the mathematical perspective, is that something that is even achievable?
Well, it might be achievable, but it's not going to be achievable with the current systems we've got and the current paradigm we've got. It's ultimately what we've got at the moment are pattern matching machines. They're not proper reasoners. The great example. There's an endless number of examples which continue to apply even to the most advanced models, and those are things like, if you make small changes to a problem, you can train these models to solve more and more complex problems. But if you make a few tweaks to the way that the problem's phrased, it suddenly can't solve it anymore. That shows demonstrably that it doesn't understand, that it's just doing pattern matching. And you can't get to, I mean, again, this is more, I think this is more of a field for sort of, kind of neuroscientists and things than it is for a mathematician. But I just think that kind of the way that we reason and the way that we think is far more nuanced than that. And I don't know whether I don't know whether or not we'll get to AGI ever, and I don't know whether we should want to or not. I don't really understand why we would be so interested in sort of usurping ourselves as the top intelligence in the world. But I don't think we're at massive risk of doing that anytime soon. So
yeah. Well, I studied neuroscience and neuropsychology. Like it's not my area of expertise. I just studied it, and it's like don't understand how we think. I mean, there's a lot of theories and so on, but it goes beyond just simple biochemistry. It's something that it's really, it's one of the biggest mysteries of science. I mean, I like to compare it to the universe. It's like, we got to know the universe, but we don't actually know anything about the universe. Like, we've got tiny little ideas. So that's why the analogy I like to use, when people talk about, oh, the intelligence is this or intelligence is that, it's like saying that, oh, we've discovered the solar system. That's it. Because we know the solar system, we understand the entire universe. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. And for me, I think this is, for me, it kind of dehumanizes intelligence, in my opinion. It's like we're not valuing human intelligence, like how powerful it is, how amazing it is. And we're thinking, oh, because some chatbot can do something remotely similar to humans, that's it. It's smarter than us. And I think that's part of that hype. But scientifically speaking, we don't know what intelligence even means. We don't even know even the process of understanding. We don't know what that is. I mean, how do we understand? What does that? How does that even work? I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, I think there will be a day, maybe in the future, distant. I think it's a very, very distant future, when we actually scientifically understand and biologically, I suppose, understand what intelligence really is, how it works, what are the mechanisms behind that. And if there's a way for us to technologically mimic it, right, or even replicate it, then maybe we might be able to simulate intelligence in its true, quote unquote, true form. But yeah, I agree with you. It's something that it's not something that can happen in our lifetime for sure. But I think for the the article I shared with everybody on LinkedIn, I kind of went viral. I think, but for those who probably don't know, well, it turns out that Sam Altman of OpenAI and Satya Nadella, they have their own definition of AGI, AI that generates, what was it, $100 billion of profit. That's AGI.
Yeah. Well, I think they're going to find that they're quite far, that they're not going to reach that anytime soon as well. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, that just shows the absurdity. I mean, I could create a definition of AGI, which is satisfied by ChatGPT if I wanted to, or I could create a definition that can never be met by any, computer system. It's sort of, it kind of becomes arbitrary, which is why I don't really like getting too drawn into the AGI question, because I think it's a bit of a distraction. What it is a marketing ploy used by these LLM vendors, basically.
Well, and it's marketing for the shareholders. It's not for the consumers. Consumers don't care about these things.
No, of course, absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I suppose as a way of ending it, I always like to try and end the episode with some kind of positivity, despite it's 2025, which is the year of, well, I was told by somebody on LinkedIn, actually, like, I get educated by people that apparently, because I'm not religious, I don't follow religion or anything like that, but apparently the Pope said that 2025 should be the year of hope, which I'm like, well, you've picked the wrong year for that, mate. However, to try and be positive, I mean, is there anything that we can be positive about, generally speaking, in your opinion? From the point of view of AI, at least.
You know what? I feel more positive and optimistic today than I did a few weeks ago. And I think that it's because I sort of feel like I think that the UK has got the opportunity to make its own path. And I think that it's really important now, because of some of the stuff that's going on in the US and the kind of political atmosphere there. I think it's really important that we do that. And I think that the fact that the government is engaging and wants to support this is good. And I think that provided we don't try and play the same game, and provided that we really throw the money behind problem solving AI, I think that that the UK could end up in a really good, strong position.
I agree.
And so could even the US. I hope that, because I'm not just thinking of this as a big competition between the UK and the US and Europe and things. I mean, I think that as the hype starts to die down and the rationalization starts, I think we'll start to filter out what the useful stuff of AI is and lose some of the nonsense. And maybe we'll end up in a place, maybe in a year's time, if we have this conversation again, we'll say, "Do you remember a year ago when everyone was pushing like these crazy sort of chatbot things? Whereas now actually I've got like all of these different AI things which I'm using or, have helped me in my life." I think that's possible. And I like to think, it's not certain that that's going to happen. And we might be in for another run of nonsense around AI agents now. But I do think that will wash over eventually. I don't think we're going to keep putting money after bad. And eventually there will be the real benefits of AI will distill out from the noise. And that's what I'm looking forward to. And I think maybe in 2025, we'll start to see a little bit of that happening.
And I think it will actually happen mostly in the UK, perhaps.
We might be out of the game. We might be. Yeah, exactly. But hopefully it'll happen everywhere eventually. It really, and then we really will be in a situation where AI has improved the world. And that's, because it has the power to do that.
I agree with you. It's just my main concern, because I even did a video about that. I did mention, like in the one I did in August, it's that because the project 2025 in America, like the things that they're trying to do, it's actually, I feel it can damage AI. And as I said earlier as well, it could even damage the internet or whatever. And I guess my hope is that the American people will realize that actually, this is actually worse than we expected. Kind of like what we had with Brexit. People, because even with Brexit, I thought, okay, I was totally against it. I thought it was ridiculous. It was stupid. Maybe, right? Something they can use it in a way that could somehow, I don't know. To be honest with you, I never thought what the hell they could use Brexit. It was impossible. And I think, but also we had Boris Johnson. But what happened to us here in the UK is, people kind of, there are people that still believe in that nonsense, but vast majority of the population, they realize actually, this is bad. We need change. Okay, they voted for Labour, which is change. They might not be happy with Labour, but at least Labour are not, I'm disappointed that they're not pushing for some kind of reversal of Brexit. And they're still, so I don't know what they're scared of. I mean, you don't have to go do rejoining or anything like that. That could freak some people out, but at least let's build bridges. Let's get back to where we were, not in the same way, of course, but as close as we possibly can. And I'm hoping that maybe the American people, because we have a lot of American listeners here, sort of, I apologize that we seem to be say, yeah, we're rooting for our country. It's like, yes, but ultimately, I think the American people will go through the same sort of pain that we went through. And they will be like, okay, we're going to demand change. And I'm hoping that, the American corporate, the tech corporations will listen. Because if they don't, I think, I've seen some pretty horrible predictions that people are going to there'll be riots and stuff like that, which I really hope that's not going to happen. But I have seen already pictures on Reddit, for example, like any ads that has anything to do with AI replacing people or whatever is vandalized. People literally now vandalizing.
Banner. Yeah, I saw that one in San Francisco.
Yeah,
smashed up sign.
Yeah. So if people start seeing that actually, this whole AI thing is just complete nonsense. It's hype. It's just for the billionaires make themselves richer and make everybody else poorer and screw everyone over. It can get really, really ugly. So I just hope that does not happen, and I hope that people just going to realize, okay, time for us to change. Certainly, that's what we're doing here. Like, we try to inform people, say, hey, look, there is an alternative path. You've got the power to do it. You've got to do it. You have got to speak out. You've got to, talk to your MPs or politicians, your representatives, and say, hey, no, things need to change. Because we're all basically right now, we're frogs in boiling water. I keep on repeating that. I think we are right now in the boiling water. And the question is, like, are we going to choose to stay there and allow the big guys increase the temperature, or can we all just jump out and find a different way? I mean, that's
exactly. We do need to jump out, and it's what you've got to hope is. I mean, I think that there's quite a lot of overreach going on at the moment with tech companies, and I think that people will start to push back in time. Also, they're very they do control information, so that's a
That's a
challenge.
dangerous thing, exactly.
Which is a dangerous thing. But people are starting to get annoyed with people in the UK are very turned off by Musk and Zuckerberg and co at the moment,
and by AI. The trust in AI is actually it's all-time low, apparently. Yeah,
it is low. So you need to build trust around things that so trust maybe needs to be rebuilt. And if government has to push back against some of the things that big tech is doing, if it overreaches too far, then so be it. I mean, the EU, I'm sure, is going to be doing that. The EU is going to have to is going to be having a fight with the big tech corporations.
Yeah,
and you saw Zuckerberg is trying to pressure Trump to say, oh, the EU is like a tariff on American tech companies, but the EU has to stand strong, and I think the UK has to do the same. I mean, we've seen a lot of attacks on our democracy coming from the likes of Elon Musk lately,
yes,
and that's really upset the UK population generally. I'd say large parts of it, and Starmer could do something about this, and he feels probably that he doesn't want to get in a fight with these companies himself, but it may have to happen.
I think,
and then trust can be rebuilt.
I think so. Well, actually, I did say I was in an event that was organized by Microsoft, Paddington. That was in November. What was it? 23, I think. November 23. I think so. It was November 23. There was a panel discussion, and I said that because they were asking me what do I feel the future of AI would be. And I made a point that actually the way I strongly believe, and actually that's a belief that I had with my co-founders when we built Nebula in 2019. We've been saying since then, and I'm continue to say this right now, the future success of AI, let's say if you're in a company, a startup that wants to deploy AI, the successful factor of your AI deployment is not how big it is, how amazing it is, but rather it can be trusted. I think trust is going to be the number one commodity. And I think, time and that has been proved time and time again, because like you said, the tech sector is overreaching far beyond. Maybe I'm being naive again, but I never thought the tech sector would try to overreach in this way. That never happened before. They had their own lobbyists, obviously. It's corporate world, it's always. But they are literally to your face now. They're literally lying to your face as a user. Mm-hmm. They're telling you, hey, there's no such thing as misinformation. Trust me, we can get rid of the fact checkers, for instance. Or, oh, you need AI. Even if you don't think you need it, well, we're going to shove it into your face through your apps, whether you like it or not. I mean, I've never seen this before, that in this way, aggressive way. And I think, trust is absolutely going to be the number one commodity. I mean, I've been saying this for, since 2019. I think it's that would be the case. So if you're a budding entrepreneur, focus on trust. That'd be my advice for sure. Well, Ben, again, always a pleasure talking to you. Again, I appreciate your time. It's like with every guest, I think I can chat with you guys for several hours. But we're definitely probably gonna have to come back to this very soon because we're sort of at the weekend before the inauguration of Donald Trump. So obviously at the moment this is all speculative. So we have no idea what's going to happen. As soon as he becomes president, that the show starts, isn't it? Then we're gonna see what's going to happen. So probably we'll probably have to come back and kind of revise or kind of look back at how things have progressed since then.
That sounds good to me. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, my man. I really appreciate your time.
No worries. Well, thanks for having me, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I told you he's really, really good, isn't he? And if you want to follow him on LinkedIn, I've got all the links and everything about his company, his work, his LinkedIn profile in the description and on the ceoretort.com website as well. But also, we are already planning our second episode where we're going to be talking specifically about China and Chinese AI, because this episode, as I mentioned at the beginning, was recorded before the Trump inauguration, as well as before this whole DeepSeek explosion. So now that DeepSeek has happened, of course, I think that has changed the dynamics a little bit of the market, although we're still observing that. But we are much more interested in looking at how China is evolving its generative AI market, which, of course, they're quadrupling down on open source. And I support that. I think open source AI, those of you who follow me know, is the way forward, not to mention decentralization as well. But again, we'll leave that for another discussion. But I also talked about that in my last episode where I was talking about the DeepSeek situation. But yeah, I'm absolutely looking forward to that conversation with Ben. I think it will be so cool. But again, as always, my friends, if you've got any questions, if you want me to pass on any details or any questions to Ben, make sure you email us at editors@ceoretort.com, or you can DM me on LinkedIn. Make sure you follow me there. I'm absolutely active in there. But also, we've got some really cool announcement coming up in relation to a new channel. Yes, but for you to be notified, make sure you subscribe here on YouTube. Make sure you follow us on Spotify. Make sure you follow us on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe on Substack. Guys, we're getting everywhere. I want to make sure that this content is available to as many people as possible, as easily as possible, because our job here is to inform you. So make sure you follow us, make sure you share the word and help us grow. And if you've got cash to spare, you can become a member. We're now going to be doing live events with our founding members. So make sure you check this out. The link in the description below. And this is something that is the only thing that is exclusive. And in fact, this is where our second channel will come in. And the idea here is really, I want this channel to be absolutely driven by membership. So we want to generate revenue through memberships, not just through sponsorships. And the partners that I've highlighted at the beginning of this episode, they're not really sponsors, but partners. I try to avoid bringing in sponsors because I want to be sure that we are as independent as possible. This is our channel. This is our discussion. Let's keep it that way. So if you can help us out, make sure you support us at ceoretort.com/support. And if you become a founding member, you'll join exclusive live virtual events and hopefully face-to-face events. More than that when you join. So guys, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.